Hello, I'm Willie from the Ozarks, and here I am on Lake Springfield. My daughter Rebecca, whose birthday was on the 7th, had a baby on the 6th, which is today for me, but you'll be listening to this 3 days later. So, my thoughts do not mean anything. Lesson 10 in A Course in Miracles workbook for students. Oh, the little baby's name is Benjamin Jacob Lipes. And that's Rebecca and Jacob's. And here we are on, what is today? The 10th of January is when I'm doing the recording. My thoughts do not mean anything. We're reading from the original edition. This idea applies to all the thoughts of which you are aware or become aware in the practice periods. The reason the idea is applicable to all of them is that they are not your real thoughts. We have made this distinction before and will again. You have no basis for comparison as yet. When you do, you will have no doubt that what you once believed were your thoughts did not mean anything. When we think through the ego's mind, it's really a meaningless thought. It's blank, he's telling us. This is the second time we have used this kind of idea. The form is only slightly different. This time the idea is introduced with my thoughts instead of these thoughts. And no link is made overtly with the things around you. The emphasis is now on the lack of reality of what you think you think. This aspect of the correction process began with the idea that the thoughts of which you are aware are meaningless, outside rather than within, and then stressed their past rather than their present status. Now we are emphasizing that the presence of these thoughts means that you are not thinking. This is merely another way of repeating our earlier statement that your mind is really a blank. To recognize this is to recognize nothingness when you think you see it. As such, it is the prerequisite for vision. We want to be seers. We want to be able to have the vision of Christ. Well, in order to do that, we have to have an open mind and start recognizing that when we're thinking meaningless thoughts, that we are thinking meaningless thoughts. Close your eyes for these exercises and introduce them by repeating the idea for today quite slowly to yourself, and then add, so you're going to say, my thoughts do not mean anything as you first start your quiet meditation. And then you're going to say, this idea will help to release me from all that I now believe. Wow, that's an important idea, isn't it? The exercises consist, as before, in searching your mind for all the thoughts which are available to you without selection or judgment. Try to avoid classification of any kind. In fact, if you find it helpful to do so, you might imagine that you're watching an oddly assorted procession going by, which has little, if any, personal meaning to you. As each one crosses your mind, say, this thought about blank does not mean anything. This thought or that thought about, you fill it in, does not mean anything. Today's idea can obviously serve for any thought that distresses you at any time. In addition, 5 practice periods are recommended, each involving no more than a minute or so of mind searching. It is not recommended that this time period be extended, and it should be reduced to half a minute or even less if you experience discomfort. So if there's any kind of discomfort, fear, any kind of avoidance feeling, well, then reduce it down to half a minute or even less, he says. Remember, however, to repeat the idea slowly before applying it specifically, and also to add, this idea will help to release me from all I now believe. All right, so we're gonna tell ourselves, my thoughts do not mean anything. And then after we settled in with that idea, we're going to tell ourselves this idea will help to release me from all that I now believe. And then we're going to watch our thoughts like an odd procession just going by. And we're going to name each one and say, this thought about blank does not mean anything. And that thought about does not mean anything. Okay, let's go take a look in our text reading, and we're going to finish section 2 of chapter 2. Chapter 2 is the illusion of separation. Section 2 is the reinterpretation of defenses. And we are ready for paragraph, let's start with paragraph 44. And as you are turning there, let me tell you about an ediblelandscaping.com filbert, and it's the American Purple Leaf Filbert. A Corylus maxima purpurea is its scientific name. Native American Purple Leaf Filbert or Hazelnut are a purple form selection of American Filbert. A beautiful and edible addition to the yard, this deciduous shrub will naturalize, producing edible nuts. Its deep wine-colored leaves are very red in the spring into summer, subtle, turning green to burgundy and into an attractive bronze in the fall. Height 6 to 8 feet, zones 4 through 8. So really good here in the Ozarks. And that's your American Purple Leaf Filbert. Okay, now let's take a look in paragraph 44, which we read yesterday, but I want to get a little running start. The atonement can only be accepted within you. You have perceived it largely as external thus far, and that is why your experience of it has been minimal. The reinterpretation of defenses is essential in releasing the inner light. I emphasized that yesterday. Let's emphasize it again. The reinterpretation of being defensive is essential in releasing the inner light. We want to get to the place where we're not defending ourselves or turning our defenses into a recognition that we're always cared for, is the way I like to think of it. By the power that's greater than any other power in the universe, or the Holy Spirit, God, Great Spirit, however you like to think of the interconnecting link of God with all of us and everything. Since the separation, man's defenses have been used almost entirely to defend himself against the atonement and thus maintain the separation. They themselves generally see this as a need to protect the body. The many body fantasies with which men's minds are engaged arise from the distorted belief that the body can be used as a means for attaining atonement. Paragraph 45. Perceiving the body as a temple is only the first step in correcting this kind of distortion. It alters part of the misperception, but not all of it. It does, however, recognize that the concept of atonement in physical terms is not appropriate. However, the next step is to realize that a temple is not a building at all. Its real holiness lies in the inner altar around which the building is built. The inappropriate emphasis men have put on beautiful church buildings is a sign of their fear of atonement and their unwillingness to reach the altar itself. Maybe we should read that one again. However, the next step is to realize that a temple is not a building at all. Its real holiness lies in the inner altar around which the building is built. The inappropriate emphasis men have put on beautiful church buildings is a sign of their fear of atonement and their unwillingness to reach the altar itself. The real beauty of the temple cannot be seen with the physical eye. The spiritual eye, on the other hand, cannot see the building at all because it has perfect sight. It can, however, see the altar with perfect clarity. 46. For perfect effectiveness, The atonement belongs at the center of the inner altar, where it undoes the separation and restores the wholeness of the mind. Before the separation, the mind was invulnerable to fear, because fear did not exist. Before the separation, the mind was invulnerable to fear, because fear did not exist. Both the separation and the fear are miscreations of the mind, which must be undone. This is what is meant by the restoration of the temple. It's the removal of the idea of separation and fear. It does not mean the restoration of the building, but the opening of the altar to receive the atonement. This heals the separation and places within man the one defense against all separation mind errors, which can make him perfectly invulnerable. Wow, isn't that what we want to be, is invulnerable? By recognizing our true self? 47. The acceptance of the atonement by everyone is only a matter of time. I used to call that, before I understood Course in Miracles, ultimate reconciliation. The acceptance of the atonement by everyone is only a matter of time. In fact, both time and matter were created for this purpose. This appears to contradict free will because of the inevitability of the final decision. This appears to contradict free will because of the inevitability of the final decision. If you review the idea carefully, however, you will realize that this is not true. Everything is limited in some way by the manner of its creation. Free will can temporize and is capable of enormous procrastination, but it cannot depart entirely from its creator, who set the limits on its ability to miscreate by virtue of its own real purpose. 48. The misuse of will engenders a situation which in the extreme becomes altogether intolerable. Pain thresholds can be high, but they are not limitless. Eventually, everyone begins to recognize, however dimly, that there must be a better way. As this recognition becomes more firmly established, it becomes a perceptual turning point. This ultimately reawakens the spiritual eye, simultaneously weakening the investment in physical sight. The alternating investment in the two types or levels of perception is usually experienced as conflict for a long time and can become very acute, but the outcome is as certain as God. 49. The spiritual eye literally cannot see error and merely looks for atonement. All the solutions which the physical eyes seek dissolve in its sight. The spiritual eye, which looks within, recognizes immediately that the altar has been defiled and needs to be repaired and protected. Perfectly aware of the right defense, it passes over all others, looking past error, because of the real strength of its vision. It pulls the will into its service and impels the mind to concur. This reestablishes the true power of the will and makes it increasingly unable to tolerate delay. The mind then realizes with increasing certainty that delay is only a way of increasing unnecessary pain. Isn't that a beautiful place we want to get to? The mind then realizes with increasing certainty that delay is only a way of increasing unnecessary pain, which it need not tolerate at all. The pain threshold drops accordingly, and the mind becomes increasingly sensitive to what it would once have regarded as very minor intrusions of discomfort. The mind, I'm going to read that again. The mind then realizes with increasing certainty that delay is only a way of increasing unnecessary pain, which it need not tolerate at all. The pain threshold drops accordingly, and the mind becomes increasingly sensitive to what it would once have regarded as very minor intrusions of discomfort. Paragraph 50. The children of God are entitled to perfect comfort, which comes from a sense of perfect trust. The children of God, that's us, are entitled to perfect comfort, which comes from a sense of perfect trust. Until they achieve this, they waste themselves and their true creative powers on useless attempts to make themselves more comfortable by inappropriate means. But the real means is already provided and does not involve any effort at all on their part. Their egocentricity usually misperceives this as personally insulting, an interpretation which obviously arises from their misperceptions of themselves, or the misperception of themselves. Egocentricity and communion cannot coexist. Even the terms are contradictory. In the last paragraph of this section, 51, the atonement is the only gift that is worthy of being offered to the altar of God. This is because of the inestimable value of the altar itself. It was created perfect and is entirely worthy of receiving perfection. God is lonely without His souls, and they are lonely without Him. Men must learn to perceive the world as a means of healing the separation. Are we doing that? Men must learn to perceive the world as a means of healing the perception of, let me read it again. Men must learn to perceive the world as a means of healing the separation. The atonement is the guarantee that they will ultimately succeed. Isn't that beautiful? Okay, let's see. Let's go back and take another look in our reading of Lesson 10. My thoughts do not mean anything. This idea will help to release me from all that I now believe. So take a moment, do this 5 times today. Take a minute or so, or less if it's very uncomfortable for you. But try to take a minute or so, and tell yourself, my thoughts do not mean anything. And after you've settled into that idea, then tell yourself, this idea will help to release me from all that I now believe. Wow, isn't that nice? We're going to be freed from all of our thoughts that are not making us happy, that are coming from the ego instead of from our true self, the soul, God, the Christ. And then after you've taken a moment to kind of settle into a quiet place, then just watch your thoughts. And as they go by like an oddly assorted procession, I kind of look at it, I'm sitting on the side of the road and there's a band, all these bands, marching bands going by, and I'm just watching them go by and watching my thoughts go by. And as they go by, name each one that as you notice it, and then let it go. But name it and say, this thought about blank does not mean anything. And then as the next one comes by, say, and that thought about blank does not mean anything. 5 practice periods today are what he's recommended. Okay, so we're starting to learn that our ideas are not real. They're just our mind's blank when we're thinking of anything other than actually only God thoughts or love thoughts are the only thing that's real. Okay, let's see if I can get this up here. Give me just a minute. I don't think the wind's going to blow my little card. So you can do this now, or you can just listen to the song and go away and do your lessons 5 times today, though. My thoughts do not mean anything. My thoughts do not mean anything. This idea will help to release me from all that I now believe. This idea will help to release me from all that I now believe. This thought about does not mean anything. That thought about does not mean anything. My thoughts do not mean anything. My thoughts do not mean anything. This idea will help to release me from all that I now believe. This idea will help to release me from all that I now believe. That thought about does not mean anything. That thought about does not mean anything. My thoughts do not mean anything. My thoughts do not mean anything. This idea will help to release me from all that I now believe. This idea will help release me from all that I now believe. Thank you all so much for joining me today. My thoughts do not mean anything. This thought will help to release me from all I now believe. Be sure to do 5 times today if you can. Take a minute or so and watch your thoughts go by, telling yourself as each one crosses your mind, this thought about blank, name it, does not mean anything. Until tomorrow, my thoughts do not mean anything. This idea will help to release me from all that I now believe.